Now we move on to our next news. Tensions are rising between Washington and Pretoria. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that South Africa will not be invited to next year's G20 summit in Miami. His announcement comes after the United States boycotted last week's G20 leaders meeting in Johannesburg. Trump has accused South Africa of weaponizing its G20 presidency and refusing to hand over leadership at the summit's closing ceremony. He has said that decision led him to block South Africa from the 2026 guest list. Trump has also repeated claims of persecution of white South Africans, allegations widely dismissed by experts and human rights groups. However, South Africa's presidency has not yet commented on this issue. Now we welcome back Professor Collins Choyang-Yu Keat. He is Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst, joins us live from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now looking at this, thank you. How might the U.S. decision to exclude South Africa from the next G20 summit affect the upcoming G20 and also the global perceptions of neutrality of G20, especially when political narratives such as claims of persecution that are rejected by experts shape such international relations?
Well, this is a tit-for-tat move. We have seen how the U.S. has boycotted the summit in Johannesburg this year, and of course accusing the South Africa of refusing to hand over the hosting protocol to the U.S. During the summit. So all this has also contributed to this sense of tension between both countries. And of course, South Africa has been the voice of the global South. And of course, Trump being Trump, nations have been well aware of the need to expect this kind of responses from Trump. And the implications for global diplomacy, international order will not be as much as to be pervasive. We have seen how these strained U.S.-South Africa relations are now being confined largely to these two nations. And of course also the G20 has long been premised on the substance of inclusion and consensus. So this exclusion of South Africa for next year's summit in Florida, of course, is based on the decision and in the policy of Trump and Washington, but it might necessarily undermine the credibility of or the intent of other G20 nations to work alongside with the U.S. Of course, they are well aware of the repercussions if they do not position themselves in alignment with the greater interests of the U.S. and of the G20 platform as a whole. So I don't see that to be affecting the credibility or the impact of G20 as a whole. And the other nations are very much in need of the impact of Trump's policies on G20, and that this is an enclosed kind of tension and issue. But of course there will be some backlash against perceived U.S. unilateral move to sidestep South Africa. But other nations will have expected that, and this is also being seen as a warning sign, as a warning by Trump that other nations will need to treat the U.S. with respect. And of course also the international order and the impact and influence of G20 will only be enhanced and amplified by the inclusion or by the impact and direct involvement of the U.S. under Trump. So I think this is a core message being sent by Trump that the G20 will not go forward without the proper and direct support from the U.S. As with the case of also G7 and as well as the UN platform as a whole. So I think it's a very strategic and move by Trump in this measure.
Right, and what do you think, to what extent should individual member states, even if it's a major country like US, be allowed to interpret or deviate from established G20 protocols?
Well, we have seen, it is inevitable for, other nations, whether they are in G20 or in the UN or G7, to not disregard the important aspect of the support and the impact of Trump's policies on these measures. So regardless of the internal mechanisms or norms of institutions, including the G20, the direct deterrence effect, the direct economic measures and impact from Trump's policies will pervade, will supersede the importance of the returns or the positive impact from these institutions, including the G20. So I think this has been the realization being realized by not only the G20 members, but also the G7 members also the European members as well as ASEAN members. So we have seen how this projection and the trend of nations getting more compelled to align deeper with U.S. interests, especially under the worldview of Trump, the lenses of Trump in terms of global policies, have been one of the core main essence of the moves by other nations now. So I don't see that other G20 states will protest vehemently or to strongly protest against Trump's move to exclude South Africa, because they know themselves well that this move will invite further repercussions and that it will not serve the greater interests of that particular individual nation as well as the interests of G20 as a whole. So
Yes.
this new model of norms have now been dictated by Trump. I think it is good for Washington to double down on the need for the U.S. also to play a greater role in terms of also providing these needed economic and security measures for all G20 nations as well as for other nations in other institutions.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for highlighting that. And with that, I would like to thank Professor Collins for joining us today from Kuala Lumpur and sharing that insight. Now we move on to UK. British Finance Minister Rachel Reeves has announced a big tax-raising budget that will take more money from workers' people saving for a pension and investors to give herself a greater room to meet her deficit reduction targets. Britain's fiscal watchdog cut its forecasts for economic growth for the coming years as a setback for struggling Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who promised voters last year that he would speed up the economy. Meanwhile, the Office for the Budget Responsibility, OBR, has said that the government will now have more than double its previous buffer for meeting these fiscal targets, something which is closely watched by investors assessing Britain's borrowing risks. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Matthew Adam. He's an American journalist and author, joins us live from Washington. Thank you very much, Matthew, for staying with us. Now, we move on to our next news now. Now moving on to Asia, a rare tropical cyclone have blew across